In this Warframe guide, I'm gonna give you the 10 best weapons to start into Steel Path with, to really deal a crap ton of damage against those high-level enemies, and to turn the game mode basically into an absolute joke. Just note that this is my personal top 10 list, you're free to disagree, and if you would have included something else on the list, then sure, go ahead and let us know in the comments down below, so we can all benefit from your personal expertise. Starting with the first weapon on our list, and I'm gonna hit you right out the gate with one of the most powerful weapons currently in the game, and that would be, of course, the one and only Fenmore. You know, the crazy thing about the Fenmore is that in the past, there were definitely strong weapons in Warframe, but as you can maybe recall, every weapon, no matter how strong, always had like at least one drawback that hurt it a little bit. But with the Fenmore, I kind of have the feeling like some Warframe player just went to the E and said, okay, here's a list of all the qualities the perfect weapon would have to have, and the E was just like, alright mate, I'm just gonna slap it into the game as is. And so the Fenmore was born. I mean, come on, this thing comes in at a whopping 140 total base damage, alright? I can still recall the times where you had weapons with like 30 base damage in total and you were like, ooh, that's very strong in the base damage department. No, the Fenmore comes in at 140. And if you switch to the Incarnon mode, you're gonna have a fire rate of 13.33 fully automatic with those 140 base damage. You don't even have impact, so no nasty impact procs, and it's just overall super crazy. As you probably know, since it's an Incarnon weapon, you also have the Incarnon evolutions. And for the Fenmore, the first two evolutions really don't matter, just pick whatever you like. But with the 4th and 5th evolution, you're gonna make sure that you reduce the crit chance, and then in the 5th evolution, you go for the one that gives you 50% chance to get 2000% damage bonus on non-critical hits. I mean, obviously 140 base damage wasn't enough already, slap 2000% more on top of that, no problem. Talking about where to get it, you have to first finish the new war quest and then you gain access to the Zeraman 10-0, where you can talk to Cavallero and get the blueprint, build it, and you got yourself a Fenmore. Going on, we have a shotgun, and that's the Babonico. You probably know the Babonico. If you don't have it, you can get it from the Biolab and the Clan Dojo. The Babonico is a shotgun, and it is a really nice one at that. With a decent crit chance of 25%, crit multiplier 2.3, everything looking nice so far, with the base damage having a decent IPS distribution and some additive toxin, this already sounds pretty nice, but what makes the Babonico really stand out is the alternative fire mode, which is a burst of viral explosive projectiles. As we all know, in Steel Path, you really want to prime enemies with viral status effects to make them more susceptible to your damage, and for that, usually you use a primer, like a secondary weapon or maybe a melee weapon, but with the Babonico, you might be in a position where you don't really need that anymore because the alternative fire is capable of doing that itself, so you can just do it with one weapon. And that's really all there is to say about it. The only negative thing I could think of right now is maybe the ammo economy is a bit screwed if you just spam the alternative fire all the time. And also, since it's one of those shoulder-mounted full-arm weapons, it can be that depending on your field of view settings, the weapon obstructs your vision a bit. But to be honest, if mentioning the looks of a weapon is one of the major down parts of said weapon, you can be pretty sure that this is a very well-performing weapon, and the Babonico absolutely is one. So if you like shotguns and you don't like this playstyle of constantly having to switch back to your primer, the Babonico would be an absolute must pick for you. The next weapon on our list is actually two weapons, but I thought I'd put them together in one spot because they serve the same purpose, and those weapons being the Kuvanukor and the Epitaph. As I just said with the Babonico, priming enemies with status effects is a really strong strategy in Steel Path, and two of the strongest and most frequently used primer weapons would be the Epitaph and the Kuvanukor. Starting with the Epitaph, this secondary weapon shoots explosive projectiles that force proc cold, and you can slap on additional elements on top of this, meaning you can deal a lot of different elemental types with it in a pretty decent radius, so that's a really naturally great primer, and that's why I absolutely love to use it. Just one thing worth mentioning, if we really get the return of self-damage, you might want to be a bit careful as to where you shoot those projectiles so that you don't actually hit yourself with it, but as long as we don't have it in the game, this is even more fun to use. Switching over to the Kuva Nukor, the concept of this one is basically the same. Since it's a Kuva weapon, you can pick your element of choice that it comes equipped with, but also it has a very high status chance, and it is a beam weapon where the beam jumps over to nearby enemies, so it also sort of has some AoE capabilities, great at dealing status effects on big groups of enemies like the Epitaph. But with the Kuva Nukor, there's another nice bonus, and that is the Kuva Nukor is not just usable as a primer, it can also be used as a really deadly damage dealer. And the reason for that is the double dipping mechanics. If you don't know what double dipping is, you can click the video in the cards where I explained it in more detail, but what it basically boils down to is if you deal damage over time with a status effect, and you have a faction mod like plus damage to Grineer equipped on that weapon, the bonus from the faction mod is applied twice for the damage over time effects, making this really strong and leading to those situations which you might have also seen in videos where people hit an enemy and it seems like they're not doing damage at all, but once the first damage over time effect kicks in, the enemy just explodes instantly and you're wondering what happened. You know, that's the magic of double dipping, and the Kuva Nukor just looks like it was made for this specific playstyle. If you want to use the Kuva Nukor to primarily deal damage, I would suggest you go with base heat damage on top of it. Then you slap on even more heat damage, a lot of status chance and fire rate, and then you of course go with the faction mod. You hit the enemy and you can already see it in the background from the footage that I show here. It does an absolute amazing amount of damage. It's crazy. You can go against basically everything with this, maybe just not against acolytes or Kuvaliches or basically anything that is limited in how many status effects of one type it can get, because this is the one weakness of the weapon. If you cannot infinitely stack those status effects, those damage over times, the weapon becomes basically useless, as you see in the background right now. Also, you burn a bit of ammo, so you might want to slap on a ammo mutation mod or bring carrier. But apart from those downsides, it's a really fundamentally great weapon and I strongly suggest you get it. And up next we have a shotgun that exploits exactly the same mechanics like the Kuva Nukor does, and that would be the Convectrix. The Convectrix has been flying under the radar for quite some time a bit, but right now it's one of the strongest weapons, if not maybe the strongest shotgun in the game, because it is just crazy how those double dipping mechanics elevate this gun to completely stellar levels. See, the Convectrix comes with most of its base damage being slash. That means it is prone to doing a lot of bleed effects with a status chance of 45% that is really likely. And as we all know, slash procs ignore armor, which is very cool. So if you get the Convectrix and you shoot enemies and you have a high fire rate and you boost up this status chance even more, you're gonna see a ton of bleeds, and those bleeds just slash enemies into pieces in just the blink of an eye. And what's more, there's even a specialized mod for the Convectrix that makes it only consume ammo while you're hitting an enemy. So you can overcome this very uncomfortable time that the two beams need to meet each other in the middle and just shoot into the air while not consuming any ammo. That's really nice, and given the fact that it's already coming in at Mastery Rank 7, you can get your hands on this weapon very early. By the way, you get it from the Energy Lab in the Clan Dojo, and it's just amazing. Bring that into Steel Path once and you try it out, and if you like it, you just slash enemies into pieces with it. It's really that nice. With the next weapon on our list, we sort of see a bit of a tendency, because we have another beam weapon that abuses double dipping mechanics to deal crazy amounts of damage, just that this time it's also a shotgun, but the Phantasma, or the Phantasma Prime. Actually, it really doesn't matter that much which one you take. The Phantasma and Phantasma Prime have been go-to weapons for high-level Steel Path for a long time, and that is exactly because it has the same qualities that the Convectrix and the Kuva Nukor both share as well. And that is, they have a high status chance, they have a high fire rate, and you can put a lot of damage over time effects with this onto the enemy, waiting for the double dip to kick in and doing crazy tons of damage. So there's not really a lot I need to say about this. Basically, all I mentioned about the Kuva Nukor is the case for the Phantasma as well. So you do crazy amounts of damage against high-level enemies, except Kuvaliches, Acolytes, and Archons, and also you're gonna burn a crap load of ammo, so bring that Carrier or Ammo Mutation mod. Also, the Phantasmas have a secondary fire mode where they shoot plasma bombs or something, but to be honest, nobody in Steel Path cares about it. Everybody uses the beam, and this is all you want to know about it. And one nice thing about the Phantasma is it's really easy to get. You just have to go over to the market, buy the blueprint, and then you can manufacture it. No painful grind or anything needed. Up next we have maybe even the most played weapon in the game as it stands now, because we're gonna talk about the Ignis Wraith. So, the Ignis Wraith is kind of an interesting choice on this list because actually from its damage output and its really high level capabilities, the Ignis Wraith should not be on a top weapons for Steel Path list. The reason I decided to put it in anyway is because the Ignis Wraith is such a popular weapon that most people decide to get it as soon as they can, because let's be honest, it's insanely powerful. You can use it in basically every mission and it's gonna burn away every enemy in its way, so most people have it, and most people will probably also have a catalyst on it and some forma and a decent build just because it's such a popular weapon. And that's the reason why I put it on the list, because if you're a Steel Path beginner, you're just starting out and maybe you don't have the resources or the time to invest into an entirely new build like getting the Fenmore, slapping Forma on it, slapping Reactor on it, everything, but you might have an already pre-built Ignis Wraith in your inventory, you can just use that. You know, for starting out with Steel Path, for completing Steel Path Star Chart, this one is absolutely enough because, and I think I might sound a little bit repetitive right here, since it is a status heavy weapon that also happens to deal heat, which is a damage over time effect, it also, and now say it with me, benefits from the double dipping mechanics. It's by far not as good as the Fenmore or the Kuvenukor, but it is good enough to get you through the Star Chart if you don't have the resources needed to get one of those better weapons right away. You might want to modify the build a bit for the double dipping, but actually it's a fine weapon to start your Steel Path journey out with. That's all I want to say. Feel free to use it until you get something better. Oh, and while you're down there giving the video a like, thanks for that by the way, let's talk about finally something different that does not have to do with beam weapons double dipping, okay? Okay, let's talk about melee weapons. As it stands right now, guns might be on average a bit better than melee weapons in Steel Path, but that does not mean melee weapons aren't worth playing. If you enjoy playing melee weapons, you can absolutely and successfully do so in Steel Path, just that for Steel Path, I cannot go and tell you the best or the best 3 melee weapons because there are so insanely many of them. So instead at this point, I'm gonna tell you what to look out for, which qualities to look out for in a good Steel Path viable melee weapon so you can pick for yourself. Basically, in Steel Path, every melee weapon is somewhat viable if it has between 20 and 30% in both status chance and crit chance at the same time. Bonus points if it has a critical multiplier of above 2.0, and even more bonus points if it is heavy into slash, if the biggest portion of its base damage is slash damage, because that means you could build it into being a bleed weapon, which, and I hate to say it again, will then benefit from double dipping again. But you know, for Steel Path Star Chart, you don't even have to go into double dipping builds. So yeah, look out for that. Some decent suggestions here would be the Nami and Skyla Prime, the Sylva and Aegis Prime, the Cronin Prime, the Orthos Prime, the Guandao Prime. There's surely also a non-prime weapon, but right now it doesn't come to mind. So yeah, just look through the weapon list, see which one of the weapons has those qualities I previously mentioned, and try them out. I'm pretty sure you're gonna perform decently well. But now that we're at it, why don't you tell us what your favorite melee Steel Path weapon is? I'm always curious to try out new stuff, so if you want to share with us, just put it down in the comments. I'm curious to look into it. But with melee out of the way, let's look at a very special weapon, and that would be the Nataruk. You know, the bow from the new War Quest, this sentient bow that you get from Hanhao. It's really a super nice, super insanely strong weapon, and the thing that I love most about it is it's one of the very few weapons that rewards mechanical skill on the side of the player. See, most bows work like this. If you charge the bow fully, you do the maximum damage. If you don't charge fully, you do a portion of the damage. And with the Nataruk, it's a bit different, because while the charged shot is much stronger than the quick shot, of course, there is a short time frame before it's fully charged, where if you release it on time, you get a perfect shot. This one having a bit more crit damage, a bit more crit chance, and just overall being a bit stronger than the fully charged one. So if you learn the bow and you get proficient with it, you get rewarded for that with more damage. But even if you go just for the normal fully charged shot, the statistics of this weapon are absolutely insane. You have a base crit chance of 50% at fully charged shot, at perfect shot it would be 60, with a crit multiplier of 2.2, which is nice, above average. By the way, for perfect shot it would be 2.4, a status chance of 50%, and overall it just deals a whole lot of damage, and you can take this to go and, now say it with me again, use it as a double dipping build, because with Hunter munitions you do a crit, you can do slash damage. It's insane, it's amazing, I absolutely love it. And also, it comes with 4 V polarity slots already on the weapon, meaning if you want to invest Forma, you probably only need 1 or 2 and not like 6. The next weapon on our list is another shotgun, but this time I promise you, it doesn't have to do anything with double dipping. And that weapon would be the Cedo. The Cedo is one Tenno favorite for Steel Path because it has such amazing mechanics, it's like it was made for Steel Path. On the surface level, it might look like a normal shotgun, decent crit values, decent damage, but what makes it really special is the alternate fire, which shoots an explosive glaive. The glaive will explode on impact with either a wall or an enemy and bounce between enemies, and each of these hits already comes with a pretty high status chance by default. But what makes it really special is how the explosion deals status effects. The explosion always applies 2 separate procs. The first proc is based on your modded damage types that you have on the weapon, and the second proc is randomized between the base elements toxin, cold, electricity, and heat. And these procs are always granted and not affected by mods, meaning you don't have to have those elements modded on the weapon, you're still gonna get it. And that's absolutely amazing, because as we know, if you use Condition Overload for melee builds, or you use Galvanized Status Chance mods for your guns, which also give you more base damage depending on how many different elemental types are on the enemy, the Cedo would be absolutely amazing, dealing so many different elements on the enemies so that you can get a really amazing damage bump in your base damage with those mods. And the best thing is, if you have multi-shot on the weapon, you're gonna not only shoot one of those glaives, you're gonna shoot multiple glaives, they're gonna bounce all over the place, explode all over the place, status is gonna be spread through the entire room, all the enemies are gonna be super stacked with I don't know how many different status procs, and you're gonna get that sweet, sweet bonus damage from all those different elementals on the enemy. And before we come to the last weapon on our list, there's 1 or 2 things I want to mention about today's video. First of all, I purposely did not include any AoE weapons like the Kuvazar, the Kuva Brahma, or whatever was super popular in the boom and zoom meta times. Reason for that is not that these weapons are now objectively bad, but with self-damage coming back into the game soon probably, these ones will take another hit, and I'm not sure how this is going to play out in the long run, so I don't want to make any bold claims that these are actually still super good and are actually super viable, because they might not be after the upcoming update. So to be careful, I simply did not include them. However, depending on which situation you're in and which type of mission you're playing with, which setup, explosive weapons might still be a great choice and a lot of fun to play. And while we're at that topic, of course, I do not claim that these 10 weapons are objectively and always the best choices for Steel Path and for everybody. It might very well be that if you play a certain other playstyle, if you play a certain Warframe, you might want to have completely different weapons, or maybe you simply have more fun playing other weapons that are also very good, so don't take these 10 weapons as an absolute granted must-have and everything else as trash. There is a lot of variety in Warframe, and you can use also other weapons that are not on today's list, and they will also probably perform pretty nicely. And with all that being said, let's look at the last weapon on today's list, and that is the #1 weapon if you're a West Coast OG. So friends, make yourself ready for a lot of California love coming from our last weapon, not the 2-pack, but the Kuva Shakur. Alright, that was either really funny or really cringy. You guys tell me. But anyway, we're gonna look at the Kuva Shakur, or the Kuva Shakur. Something like that would probably be the Grenier type of pronunciation, but I'm not gonna do that for the rest of the video. Yeah, basically the Kuva Shakur. It's a semi-automatic Kuva weapon, it's a rifle type, you're gonna do a ton of damage with it, and also the added benefit of it is it also has a bit of AoE capability, meaning you can absolutely stomp big blobs of enemies into the ground. Maybe you even want to pair it with a Warframe ability that pulls enemies together, it would be super nice. And if you like heavy-hitting semi-automatic guns, then this one is also a great suggestion for your arsenal. And now, if you don't want to miss out on any future helpful Warframe guidance content, you might want to think about dropping the channel a sub. I would definitely greatly appreciate that, and of course welcome you to the crew. And if after picking your favorite weapon from this video now want to go and do massive damage in Steel Path, then you might want to check out this video showing you all the nitty-gritty tricks on how to maximize your damage output in those high levels. That's it from my side, I'll see you next time, and until then of course, good loot.